Okay, so it looks like the summit stuff here, the agenda is still on. I don't know if there's anything left to discuss here. We just remove this and close it.
I think it might be good to have a, well, I don't know. Like, do we want to have a review the actions at some point?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Do we want just like a separate, I think there's an issue on here, which was get the agenda nailed down. And so I think that's closed. It sounds like we need a review actions thing, right?
Yep. So maybe, yeah, close this one and add a review summit actions just to see that we start to make progress on those.
Are you talking about the 276? So 267, I mean.
267, yeah.
Because there was actually two. There was that one, and then there was, I guess, the one that it said fault from 203. Is that the other one?
Yeah, I just created another one just to drive the agenda because the other one was, the original one was getting a little in the tooth, I felt. But this looks like it can be closed.
Yeah, the 203 is the one with all the
the links and stuff.
Summit write-ups on it.
This one can be closed too, though, right?
It can be closed, but I think it would be nice to maybe extract these comments with the, there was some links to some Google documents with some action items and stuff like that. Maybe, I'm not sure if we've done this before, but would it make sense to kind of gather that all together in a markdown file somewhere, or is it okay to just leave it in a closed issue?
Yeah, like what you're saying is kind of like minutes from the summit would actually be good to have somewhere, because it'd be easier to, like,
it quickly get lost in
even if it just has the actions and has the links to the videos. That I think would be quite useful as something we could then point people to.
So does somebody want to go through and do that?
Yeah, I can do that. Where should I put it? Do we have a folder already in the diagnostic repo where we put minutes like this, or?
There's a minutes folder, or like a working group meetings folder. The code thing. So that's probably a fine place.
There's also this meetings other. So we have like the work group meetings. Then Jarish created the meetings other because like we had a meeting which wasn't, a regular work group meeting, but something else. So it might fit nicely in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the best place. I'll put it in there.
Or even create a top level summit folder or something like that.
I'm good with that as well. Maybe that's better than meetings other. Meetings other sounds very miscellaneous.
You could just have summits if we continue to plan to, we've had two, continue to plan to have more. It's probably not bad to have it in there.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so you're going to put in I pasted the link to the actions. So I think if we have the actions and then the videos and whatever else you think is useful, that's the key stuff.
Yeah. I'll
maybe a couple of the links, like you said, to the other docs that get started working as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay.
Awesome. So 227, the postmortem debugging support inside V8 Node.js. I don't know if anybody has an update.
That was one of the things that was discussed. We didn't come to any conclusion in terms of the final resolution, but I think the action items in this doc here, the next things was to continue on the V8, the torquification of the objects in V8, so that then that can actually be used to generate the LL node metadata as well. I think from the different options, that's the one that seemed to be the most feasible. And basically, it'll be a matter of pushing that one forward and seeing what we can do with that data.
Okay. Best practices guide. I don't know if anybody was able to make any progress on that.
So that one, again, we had some good discussion at the summit. Peter Menton has an action to provide input on refining the list that we had to make them some more specific, more use case focused. We also have the action, which I'll work on with Jarish, to get a draft of the memory best practice. We agreed in the summit that we would bring, work to bring heap dump or something equivalent into core, which you've probably already seen. There's been some action on.
Yeah.
James has a PR, first PR that's landed. I think we still need a second PR, which actually adds triggers to be able to trigger them without having to write code or anything. But so there's already progress on that. The other thing there was consensus on, and the people there, is we should bring the heap sampler into core. And Ali's going to help with the draft in terms of the language we should have in there for the best practice of, basically explaining when you would use the heap dumps, when you would use the memory profiler, and how to use those tools to debug memory issues.
Awesome.
So that's kind of the other thing. The third thing is we need to get volunteers for some other areas of best practices. So offline, if anybody wants to look at those and volunteer for some, that'd be great. Otherwise, we may be chasing some people up for those.
I have a tangent question regarding best practices that we talked about at the summit, because when I was looking through the videos, the only thing I could find was we talked about the support tiers.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of something that we started talking about during or kind of when we were talking about best practices, but I couldn't, maybe I missed it, but I couldn't really find anything in the video where we actually did talk about the best practice documentation in general. Did we skip that, or did we just go directly to support tiers?
No, we had the list up on the screen that showed the 5 or 6 best practices we were going to work on. And that's where Peter had commented that they should be, some of them should be more specific, and he was going to jump into that. We then started to talk about the memory one, which was the first on the list, and we spent most of the time talking about heap dump in core and memory profiler and that kind of stuff.
Okay, I'll try to take a look again. I don't know why I couldn't find it.
Okay, but yeah, no, we definitely had some discussion, although we didn't get beyond talking about mostly those 2 things in terms of the best practices. The tiers came into play in terms of, as we define the best practices, we should make sure that the tiers reflect that, if we're saying this is a best practice and it uses these tools, then, we should make sure that we have those tools at the appropriate tiers if we're recommending them and so forth.
Okay, so it must have come just before the talk about tiers. That's probably in the video where
I think so, yes, yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
Okay. So the deep dives, I don't think any update there. The tiers of support for tools, number 157. It sounds like you guys discussed some of that stuff at the summit.
Yeah, just in the context of what I just mentioned.
The async hooks, the stable API tracking issue.
I'm not sure if we talked specifically about the tracking issue per se, but we did talk about what it would take to make async hooks non-experimental. And we kind of diverted into saying, okay, what is it actually that most people need? And most people actually need continuous local storage. And so we actually kind of changed the discussion a little bit to talk about if we should get CLS into core, because then we could have an API that was easier to reason about, that was higher level than async hooks, and that were easier to land as non-experimental, as stable. Even though the underlying async hooks API that obviously would use would still be experimental. That meant we could get a lot of people up to use the CLS part and less people using an experimental API, which would mean it might, well, in theory at least, we could then change the experimental API behind the scenes and still keep the same CLS API. That was like the gist of that part of it. But I don't think we came any closer necessarily. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. To actually get async hooks out of experimental.
Right. I mean, I'll agree with your interpretation. I think there were a few people who really want to get it out of experimental anyway. So there is one of the docs that's opened is around working on some of the performance aspects. So I think Benedict and Matteo are pushing on that to try and remove that as one of the blockers. But I'm in the same mindset of you, is that I don't know that we've closed on thinking that we have the right API, and the discussion on CLS was all around, well, if that's what most people need and we can get something on that level that is what we believe makes sense, then if it leaves us more flexibility for changing async hooks under the covers, if we you know sort of promote that versus async hooks themselves.
Okay, and that conversation was on video as well.
Yes,
Not something that was linked, but I haven't watched it. Okay,
should be. I mean, I think you can catch up with Bill as well. We did touch on the async context document that you had, and I think we really need to kind of come to closure on that to see if does that help us figure out what the API should be?
yeah,
that we've got the right thing, the wrong thing.
Yeah, I realize I've sort of been, I don't know, MIA on that. I just had too many other things going on. I talked to Bill and one of our guys, Paulo, who was there, and I talked to Paulo a little bit about, can we go and take some of those ideas and get them implemented on V8, and just kind of start seeing what that conversation looks like. So I don't know if, that's going to get a lot of traction.
Okay. That would be great if they did that, because I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I have very limited time to sink into this at the moment, and I don't know when that's going to clear up. And I think the other aspect to it is it's kind of like a wonky, complicated topic, and it's like you try and explain things or try and get traction, and it just either people's eyes glaze over or it feels hard, right?
So I guess it's when you said you might get Bill to implement something, I think that would potentially make it more concrete for people, right?
It would, and I need to sync with them about where their time is, and I do think that they have some cycles to go off and push on some related type things. So,
right.
So I need to see where that's at. But I'll see what I can do. It's ideal world. It's we tack this we'd have people hitting this from at the spec level and hitting it at the implementation level.
Right.
And we'd surface something out that would address, I think, the noted gaps of async hooks, right?
Yep.
Which is what is the API and what is the terminology and what is the outside of node support, and how do you ensure that the next async await doesn't get broken or gapped out from this, right? Yeah. So I'll sync with Bill, and I'll sync with Paulo about it, and see what I can do.
Yeah, because it was even the Matteo showed Bubble Prof, and some of his examples were you see these things that go off to the side and come back, and that was, I think even at that point he was kind of saying, well, yeah, this isn't that useful, and it's probably because it's showing lower level details of what's going on with the promises as opposed to what you're thinking should be happening on the async level.
Yeah, there's a gap between async hooks and its eventing on resource instances and what the user is passing across a boundary that they deem to be an asynchronous boundary, right?
Right.
And that's not super useful for something like continuation local storage, right? I don't know. But yeah, I agree. It's like apologies. People that, I wish I could have been there to discuss this stuff. Unfortunately, it's like I've been asked to go chase other things at the moment.
Sure.
But I'll touch base with Bill. I think he's out on vacation right now, but I think he's coming back in a week or something. So I'll make sure that sort of to sync with him periodically and try and push them and making some progress here.
Yeah, I think that's probably sound like they did have time. They're getting involved in V8, so it sounds like a good way to pursue it.
Yeah. So I think that kind of covers 107.2, which is a formalization of this stuff, which is, there's some still, I think, status quo on where we were at before.
I mean, I think and as was mentioned, the other thing is that there is now a CLS API, a PR for a CLS API in core, so that's sort of all related to this. And if people are interested in this part, should also be looking and reviewing that to make sure we don't suffer a similar problem of having an API that doesn't quite match. Yeah,
and I'll look over the CLS PR at some point. I think it's like I think the challenge with something like that is if your underlying linkage, right, is confused because the links are these very low level resource things, right? Then you end up traversing the wrong path for what your continuation is, right? And looking up the wrong values for things. And it's like from an API point of view, I assume, because the continuation local storage API is a fairly straightforward API, right?
Yep.
Correctness and how do you reason about correctness is a very different thing. And I think that's been sort of the challenge all along with async hooks is how do you reason about its correctness, right? And that's not a very obvious or intuitive thing. And I think that's kind of where the challenge has been.
But if there's cases where it's going to follow the wrong context, we should probably try and get those test cases captured, right? Like, so if you kind of have a feeling from the work you've done on the asynchronous, like if you do this, this, and this, the current implementations will probably give you the wrong thing. It would be really good to get that so at least it ends up being a test case for the CLS stuff.
Yes, I agree. I hope those things would surface, right? And I don't know that it necessarily. I think you're at risk from somebody going in and introducing, I don't know, like introducing a timer inside of their implementation of like the socket connection logic, right? And it kind of throwing things off in certain ways that people didn't expect. And I think that's kind of the challenge, right? Is that it's exposing this stuff in a low-level way that makes it brittle with respect to low-level underlying changes, right? But yes, absolutely. If there's cases that people identify, there should be tests to ensure that the right thing happens. Assuming that there's an agreed upon right thing, right?
Right, but
yeah, I agree with that.
Stephen and I, we talked about that it would probably make sense based on this CLS PR to make a fork of the Elastic APM agent because we have a very comprehensive test suite that uses that base branch of that PR with CLS, and then swap out our own CLS we have built and use that and then see if we get the same test result.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, that would actually be a very a good validation, right? And likewise for other people that are doing, because I know there's an existing CLS implementation out there, I thought, right? Like there's been one around for years. I don't know what the gaps are. I assume native promises and async await are probably gaps in what that supports. I haven't looked at it in years, actually. What's the idea with the current? There's a package for CLS out there. This would just supersede that.
Yeah, it's that those are using, like, I think it, well, yeah, we think the argument would be you can do it better in core because you can get a tighter integration, you can reflect things, you know, more closely and so forth.
Okay.
And there's also just that the landscape right now is very hard to get an overview of. There are so many different implementations that and forks of existing implementations that's stalled. So there's the current continuation local storage where that resorts to patching everything and not using async hooks. Then there is a fork of that that is using async hooks, and then that fork is actually also falling back if it's running on Node version of Node prior to Node 8. It's not actually falling back to patching things. It's falling back to using async wrap. So it uses process dot binding to use async wrap. So it's not nice. And there is on top of that there is a lot of inconsistencies in how these different implementations work when it comes to, well, do we bind to promise then, or do we bind to whenever the promise was created? You know, what is the context bound to and stuff like that. And if we can kind of say, okay, there's this one way to do it inside Node Core, I think that will make a lot of people's lives easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not like there's one out there that's saying, hey, we've got it all right and we're happy with what we've got. And so it's kind of like there's things that people get away with, but I think we can make the situation much better with the common one in core.
Okay.
Is there an issue or PR open for that?
There's a PR in Node Core to add the API.
Okay.
Let's see if we can find it.
Yeah, I unfortunately haven't had time to look at it yet. I should probably do that.
Yeah, it'd be good. Like, we don't want that to land too fast. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
It needs, I think it's called, okay, yep, this is the one. I'm just going to paste it into the, like, I've made a few comments in that it seems different than continuation local storage in a few different ways. And anyway, I think it just requires a fair amount of discussion. But it's good to have that discussion and start to experiment and stuff like that.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I think last thing is 84, which is this event tracing thing. I don't know any update on that.
At least not here, but I don't think he has any update for that. I guess Profeta would fit under this. And over last week, I've been talking to the people who work on Profeta, and so I'm getting some more clarity on how it fits in the node. I realized that some of that I didn't have at the presentation in Munich. So if there's still like outstanding concerns or anything, please feel free to post in the issue. One thing in particular is that I mentioned protobuf as a dependency. It turns out they're trying to make it so it's not a runtime dependency, so it wouldn't actually be part of the node binary, which would maybe help with the binary size and also just the compilation steps in general.
Okay.
So.
But it's currently a runtime dep of Profeta?
It is right now, but it's not intended to be. It's just, okay. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it on the agenda. Is there anything from anybody else?
I was kind of curious after seeing James' PR on the Heap snapshot in Node Core. One thing is I think you can do that in userland now with the inspector module. However, having it as a separate function is nice because then you could actually use it while you're debugging. And I think if you're debugging, then you can't use inspector. So it's actually not bad to have that in core. But there was a comment left in that PR, I think, asked kind of generally asking about the whole thing with heap snapshots being a huge JSON WAD, and what are we going to do about that? Because that's a huge issue. Right?
Yeah, that's been a long time discussion on this front.
Yeah.
I guess the first thing I did want to throw in at the beginning is it was mentioned you could do it through the inspector, but there seemed to be consensus that that's not something you can really do in production. So was one of the other reasons. Like, you want something you can actually generate in production. That's why I was saying there's going to be like a second PR that adds like some external triggers through a signal or something like that. And yeah, I mean, we've had the discussion way back like years ago about saying, could we come up with a new format, or even having, being able to generate a heap dump from a core dump. And there was some discussion on that. It just never really went anywhere. I think at the summit, there was a little bit of a discussion that, maybe if there's progress on the DSL or the torquification of the objects, that might then give you enough metadata that you could use LL Node to walk through the heap and generate a heap dump in some other format from the core file.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's been years since I've kind of asked the question. So I was curious if any movement had been made on it.
I think
it's certainly kind of a frustration point when trying to get a heap snapshot of a large program, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a matter of we haven't had people who've had enough time to actually push on that.
Cool.
I think everybody would be interested if you said, "Hey, I've got a solution for that." Everybody would say, "Yes, let's tell us what it is, and maybe we can help you get it across the finish line."
Yeah, it's a fun science project for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, anything else from anybody? And the problem there was just the JSON was too large if you have a large heap.
Yeah, I'm thinking we used to gauge it as like the JSON file would be like 2 to 3 times heap usage, something like that. So they could get quite large. And then we were reading them in a server. That became a problem. Had to actually work a process to read them, so we didn't kill our own server. So having some other format other than JSON that doesn't require a huge one-time parse would be super interesting, I think. But that's about as far as I know anybody's done much thinking.
Okay. Okay, anything else from anyone? We're good? We're done?
See you next time.
All right, thanks, people.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.